Well, I feel like we have a lively conversation ahead of us, so I would vote that we go ahead and get started.
Great.
So thanks everyone for being here. Like I said, I'm very excited about this topic. I'm sure I'm going to learn a lot, and I really am looking forward to the input and thoughts from the folks attending as well. But I think Brittany's going to start us off with our gem spotting, so I will hand it over to Brittany initially.
Lisa. So I wanted to start off just with a little bit of a reminder of what GEMS are. We've been doing this for a little while now, but it's always helpful at the beginning of the year when we're getting back into things just to have a little bit of a reminder. So GEMS are really anything that makes your life easier. We often talk about those tips and tricks and tools that we use at work, but really it could be anything. So we've shared GEMS in the past related to, I think, like running or, kind of exercise. I've shared one that catalogs your cookbooks for you so that you can easily access recipes. So things like that. And with this kind of, new year, new start mentality, I know a lot of us are not making necessarily resolutions this year or making goals this year and kind of seeing what comes at us. But I know that we all kind of have some things that we might want to be focusing on or considering for this new year. So with that in mind, I would love to have us share any gems that we've come across in the last few months since we've last met. And to kick us off, I'm going to actually hand it back to Lisa, who's going to share 2 gems that she shared previously with us. So Lisa, over to you.
So these came up in a recent research and evaluation kind of unit meeting where folks were talking about publications, so related to our topic today. And one of the things discussed was, how do you know where to pitch it? Other than the big names or, kind of the go-tos, if you've really got something that is obviously intended for the Journal of HIV Communication or whatever the specific journal is there a way to kind of broaden your search and just make sure that you're aware of other publications that might be a good fit? And so 2 folks, Bola and Joe Millward, each contributed these links, which are essentially tools for exactly that purpose. So I'm happy for folks. I don't know if you can click on those or if Jarret, you want to give them a look, but they do other things as well. That was sort of the context under which they were raised. The second one looked a little more intuitive to me, but both of these can serve in this purpose. So it was kind of a, you can put in your abstract and put in some keywords and it will start to help winnow, here are some other manuscripts or some other, publications that you might consider submitting to.
Great. Thanks, Lisa.
Yeah.
So we're going to this slide again, and I know we usually kind of do this verbally and we'll have time for that as well, but I wanted to kind of get our creative juices flowing and have people use the annotate feature. So up at the top under view options, you can select annotate, and you can add to this slide your gems, anything that you've come across. Feel free to draw, feel free to add it as text. You can even try and put in a picture if you're artistically inclined. I am not, but please feel free to kind of add in whatever comes to mind here. Thanks, Jarret.
Where is the annotate feature? Am I just being silly?
If you go up to the top of your Zoom screen and you bring down kind of like the control sort of bar thing, it will have view options. If you press like that down caret, it'll come up with the options.
Annotate. Oh, cool. Learning something new about Zoom every day. Thanks.
Yeah, this is an interesting way to do things. Yeah, I'll just say with the GH journal search, Lisa, since I was thinking about commenting on that related to this, but this is actually a search engine that Debbie developed with Jim Shelton to help people find global health journals. So it may not still be what you need to find the journal you want, but it certainly will narrow it down to global health. And I actually have had on my to-do list to make sure it's still up to date.
So it seems pretty easy to create a text box. How do you then move that text box? Or can you not do that?
I think maybe you had to do it at the time you pasted it.
You created
That's what I'm thinking, because
I
can't go back
just
to mine.
dragged mine.
I did too. I just
Yeah,
moved mine
even after I deleted it, and then I was still able to drag it.
Okay.
Great, so we'll give people a few more seconds. Looks like we have some really great ideas coming in. Just finish up. All right, so yeah, I'd love to invite anyone that wants to share a little bit more about their gem. I see a few related to kind of meditation, or kind of getting in a focused sort of space for work. I also see technology gems related to Chrome, and then I also added that I received a new planner, so I'm excited about that. But would anyone like to share a little bit more about the gem that they added?
I'll share about mine. It's quick, short and sweet, and I think I might have mentioned this in another forum, but I subscribe to the app Headspace, which I've used for meditation, and then they're always adding new features to it. And one of the ones that they added was something called Focus, and it's pretty straightforward, but it's sort of a way to prime yourself for focusing for work. And they go through, there's a little video in advance, and they talk about how, if you're listening to music that has words that you recognize, it can distract you from your work. But if you listen to music in a different language, and certain attributes about the music can really help you focus on your work, and using the same music consistently and like turning it on and off during focus periods can help you do a better job during those times when you really want to get some good work done. So anyway, I like that, and I've been trying it, and it's true, it works. So works for me anyway.
That's great. I feel like we're all looking for those little tricks that'll help us focus, especially as we continue to work from home. And there are many more distractions, I think. And so I see two related to Chrome. I'm curious if either of those or both of those people who added those would like to expand on those gems, because I've never heard of these before.
I added the one about the eyedropper plugin. So Liz Tully recently shared that with me. So when we're working, a good example would be, I was working on the TCI website, and we just changed the color palette. I never remember what the number is to go along with that specific color. And when I just try to look at the color, wheel and choose, I don't choose well, apparently. So it's this you can look up eyedropper, and it's a plugin. And so it actually takes it from a different website and tells you what the color number is, and you could add it to a different thing. So you don't have to keep on fiddling. So it was awesome.
That's great. I think that would be very useful, especially in a lot of the work that we're doing in terms of the websites and pages that we're looking at or building. Great.
Lisa, would you mind reaching out to Marcella and making sure she knows about that? Because I know she's working on the Breakthrough Action site, and just make sure she knows about it. Thank you.
I can do that.
And I added the colored tabs. This is not unlike Workona, which Sarah Harlan shared with us a couple gems ago. But basically, when you have a bunch of tabs open in Chrome, if you right click on one, you can say add to a group, and then create a name for that, and it will cluster and compress a group you're not working in. And then if you want to jump to something else, it expands that group as you're in and among it. So it's just another organizing tool.
That's great. I definitely am one of those people that have a lot of tabs open, so I feel like this might work for me.
I would second Workona. I think I presented it, Lisa, several times ago, but I've been using it. No worries. I've been using it for I think a year and a half now, and in addition to lumping the resources and websites per project. I also have at work, of course, I also have a section for my personal life on taxes, anniversaries, weddings, websites that relate to these things. And it's been super helpful, especially also when it comes to trying to remember all the passwords and credentials. It utilizes the Chrome password notebook. And so I can move around between devices and easily access all my sites, whether I'm working or in personal mode or whatever.
That's great. Yeah, I think those organizing tools for all of those tabs are especially important, and having easy access to all those passwords I also appreciate, because I constantly forget my passwords. Great. And it looks like Simone has added a little bit of a just like screenshot of what the eyedropper looks like in terms of the extension. So you can check that out to kind of get a more visual of what that actually looks like in practice. So thanks, Simone. And this is my new planner. I'm excited about it. He's an artist and has just like really funny kind of quotes, funny sort of sayings. And I am a paper planner person, so I've been struggling, and I've tried many planners over the years. The balance between reflection versus goal planning and how that all looks. So he has really kind of great prompts to sort of think about what your goals are for the month, then think about reflecting at the end of the month, what worked well, what didn't work well, what do you want to work on after that. So, kind of a let's face it, things didn't always go so well, things might have gone better. So I'm excited about this planner. And I hope that I have a reason to use a planner this year. We'll see. But here's hoping, fingers crossed. I will turn it back over to Lisa and Lisa. But thank you all so much for sharing, and thank you for using the annotate feature. I know it's a little tricky to get a hang of, but I figured this was a little bit of a creative or different way of sharing. So over to you.
Sorry, before we jump off that slide, I have a question. Is there any, for those who know annotate, like what just happened to everything that was written up there? I know the session's being recorded, so there is some recording of it there, but is it otherwise lost and gone forever if I didn't do a screenshot?
I cleared them, but you can do a save. So there is a function there on your toolbar that you can, to basically.
Which would be like a screenshot, right? Yeah. Okay, just curious.
I don't know how well that worked, because I was on another call where that all got lost, even though they thought they saved it.
So more to learn there. Okay, thanks.
Okay, well, without further ado, I know Jarret and Natalie Culbertson have put a lot of thought into our coming session content. So thank you so much, Brittany. And it's, having something interactive is always appreciated. But I will, at this point, hand over to Jarret and Natalie to take us away on innovations in peer review.
Thanks, Lisa. And Natalie and I had a couple really rich conversations in preparation for this. I think we scheduled, 40-minute conversations, and they ended up each being 2 hours. It's such a really fascinating area, and it's really, there's so many rabbit holes we can go down. But we do have a somewhat of a agenda, which obviously needs to be modified right away. I did not accommodate for the gems, but I'll talk a little bit about the origins of the inquiry. This did stem from my independent study as part of a Master's of Science Writing program that I recently completed. We'll talk a little bit about the problems with peer review, some of the innovations I discovered, some controversies and debates, and then we'll have a discussion. Although, we're such a small group, I would actually like to encourage us to have conversations as we go. And to begin with, I would love to hear from you about what you're noticing about how peer review is evolving and what innovations are coming to the fore. So be free to jump in or chat.
I could share that Recently, well, two things I've noticed. One is some of the review processes have actually, depending on the journal, sped up because of COVID, because they knew exactly kind of what they're looking for, that the content needs to be about COVID at this time. So they were pretty quick. And then the other thing is like this pre-print option, which was a little confusing because it's not, they haven't necessarily accepted it yet, but it's online as if it is. So those are the 2 points I would like to share.
Anyone else? Anything you've noticed about the space right now, the publishing space? If not, perhaps we can do a quick poll to get a sense of who's published recently, an article in the last 2 years. We did expect to see some research folks joining us, so we wanted to get a sense of who's been publishing, and we also have a follow-up question on who's done reviews in the last 2 years. So perhaps we can show those results. It could be author or co-author. And okay, so most of us have not authored in the last 2 years.
Sorry, the poll disappeared before I had a chance to add my yes to it, and our numbers are small enough that might have made a difference.
Yeah, same with me. I think I had a paper come out within the past 2 years, and I also missed the poll.
Okay, so about 50-50. And here's the next one, sorry.
And by this question, it's reviewed on behalf of a peer-reviewed journal, like formally reviewed?
Sorry, yes, that's correct. This is in the context of following the procedures and processes that a journal has outlined, such as GHSP. All right, I think we could show results if everyone got their response in. So 57% yes and 43% no. So that's really interesting that most of us, the folks who have published and authored papers have also, I presume there's some correlation, although not necessarily, but those numbers are about the same. So that's really interesting. I wanted to start out by just acknowledging a particular result from the case success co-creation process. They did report that the stakeholders they worked with lacked timely data. They wanted it in real time, not peer review time. So that was fascinating to hear from you that the COVID-19 has sped up reviews. But many people recognize this as a need, and many academics, editors, and publishers are making efforts to try and speed up the peer review process without losing quality. The innovations in peer review was the topic, as I mentioned, of my independent study in 2019. Several years ago, I started a second master's degree using my tuition remission, and the field was in science writing, and I took 1 or 2 classes each semester for 5 years. It was done almost entirely online through discussion boards, and this started getting a little monotonous and dull toward year 4, so I set up an independent study so I could sort of follow my own interests. It was largely because of what I'd been seeing, but also realizing that a lot of people don't know what, outside of academia or outside of research or outside of science, don't really know what peer review is or how it works, right? They have a vague understanding that scientists get together after a piece of work is completed to determine if it should or should not be published. But nowadays, the peer review process is seldom that simple. It's sort of akin to policymaking process. It's labyrinth-like, time-consuming, and frequently unrewarding. So my independent study was done through a layman's lens, and I used a breadcrumb method. So the researchers amongst us who might be expecting a lit review, sorry to disappoint. There's so much out there, and so little time. As I mentioned earlier, I'll present some innovations. Would like to have a comment from Natalie, and then open the floor to you. If the conversation is super rich and we're all enjoying ourselves, there's no need for us to speed through this. We'll try to consider a second meeting at another time to finish up. So the sources for this independent study were my personal experiences in reviews. I also did interviews with 2 editors and 1 researcher. My advisor was Adam Marcus, who co-leads Retraction Watch and is the editor of Gastroenterology and Endoscopy News. So that was, I hooked up with him through the science writing program. A huge refrain I heard from folks and what I read about was that peer review is the worst form of review, except for all the rest. So I heard from Dr. Schroeder was that, people will critique it, but nobody really wants to replace it. Oh, sorry, this is from Dr. Grundy. You don't want a bunch of people at the top doing it. You don't want it done by popular vote, and you don't really want, just anything goes, or even standardized metrics. She suggested that the field at large wants to shore up and protect expert judgment while holding it accountable. And that's one of the reasons why there are, every 2 years, peer review congresses. And this was news to me, so fascinating that every 2 years, researchers, publishers, editors get together to talk about peer review and what the challenges are and how to improve it. Dr. Schroeder said, we don't really know much about peer review because we've never examined it. We assume it works. And that assumption, I think, is really coming under examination now, of course, with COVID-19, but also the numbers of researchers, right, are just exploding across the world. Back in 1776, as Publons reported, a lot of researchers who were in the field knew every single other researcher who's doing similar work, and they could send a manuscript across the sea, and expect it back in a year from somebody with a handwritten note that said, your method's XYZ. But right now we have 8 million researchers, and this data is from 2015, so it's, I'm sure, much higher than that. So many researchers around the world, and of course the internet is helping us connect with each other, but there are fields that are really moving fast. Of course, digital health was a great example, but COVID-19 now I think has usurped every other field, is moving at a speed, lightning speed, and so it's a different space, right? We assumed peer review works, but we don't know. We have, of course, these quality issues, mis and disinformation. Evidence-based policy is under threat like never before. We hear it in the news every single day to our detriment. There's also limited incentives for conducting reviews. This has been a huge issue for a while. And then something else that I learned and sort of blew my mind was that peer review itself is not always replicable. And Natalie and I talked about this, and I would love to invite her to just provide her thoughts on these problems.
Now?
You're welcome to, or or I can, I'm
No,
being
that's
a little
okay.
bit, a little loose.
I think I'll just say a few things, and I can interject in a little bit later too. But I think that just what Jarret's pointing out are things that we obviously all know, that there are lots of pros and cons with peer review. I think that in terms of the pros, what we hope we're getting from peer review is an honest critique of an article by somebody who is in that field and is a colleague of the people who are writing the article, but may not, and hopefully don't know them or aren't aware of this as their work. So I think that, you're looking to get people who are familiar with the field, who are familiar with the literature, who are familiar with the context, to provide their feedback on something. And he is absolutely correct. It is not replicable. I think that if I were to, invite 3 reviewers to look at one of our papers and then, invite 3 different reviewers, we may get totally different perspectives in terms of what's important, in terms of what's valuable. We just had a paper recently in the journal that, we had a reviewer who he just took it apart, honestly, and, said there was a lot of untruths in it. It was a policy paper. And the authors took a lot of issue with that, of course, because, their perspective of it was that it was correct. So, I mean, I think that there's no doubt that there are a lot of problems. One thing that, everybody has to remember is that peer reviewers are volunteers. There's only 2 incentives that I can really think of for reviewers to review papers. And one is that they're getting to see what's the latest, in research that's coming out before anybody else does, and getting to have a say in that in terms of its value. And the other is that they're giving back to the publishing world, because they know that their articles are going to be published at some point and will need peer reviewers. So there's a reciprocal kind of situation there. So beyond that, there's no money, there's no fame, there's no probably value to their CV or tenure, like there is with publishing. So it's not easy to find people who are willing to do that with so little incentive, to be quite honest. So I guess, I mean, I will chime in when I see things that I have ideas about more, but I want to let Jarret go on with some of the ideas he has.
Yeah, sorry to surprise you like that, Natalie. It just occurred to me that be a little. We wanted to hear from you at this point, and yeah, perhaps Alice, I know you have a question or a comment.
Yeah, I don't know if this is the right time.
Jump
But
in. Yeah.
One thing that has really amazed me in peer review comments I've gotten on articles we've done with, teams or a few people is, and sometimes I think ego drives these reviews. Some of the comments are so narrow, they're so specific, they're so really ununderstanding of what you're saying or what your research is saying. I don't know, it's it's a labor to try to answer them, because sometimes they're just not even relevant, but they're pushing that person's very narrow point of view. And that, I don't know, I find that frustrating, but I think it's common.
I did hear that from Dr. Grundy, who said that she wants more relevant, in her experience, she wants more relevant feedback. She doesn't want the comment that says, you forgot Dr. So-and-so's research that was published in 1922, or this piece of work is missing, Tara says, yes, one of the other benefits to the peer review is that some journals and publishers do thank their reviewers on an annual basis, so they may get some kind of acknowledgement at year's end of being super reviewers. And I think, Natalie, you and I have talked about this a little bit, but I want to sort of riff on Alice's comment about ego. And I think that, one of the innovations I explored, and I've chatted with Natalie about this, is gamification and having leaderboards for reviews. And I think that sort of does try to harness this aspect of ego, but of course in a completely different way. Am I sharing a different, I'll go with this. I think I might have a different version. My apologies. One of the biggest innovations that I've seen that I think has the most potential is open peer review. And this is a term that is defined in many different ways, but most often includes 2 aspects: open identity. So instead of the double blind, where your authors and reviewers are shielded from people knowing who they are, your names, the names of the authors and the names of the reviewers are made made public or known to each other, but also made public. Then there's open reports. So this is about publishing your reviews. So if folks are, not on topic, or they're not really interested in providing high quality research, but they've been asked to do it, this is really a way to try and improve accountability, but also improve the quality of reviews. If somebody knows that their reviews are going to be published alongside the manuscript, they're more likely to take a lot of time and put a lot of energy into making it really good. And Lisa did post that Gates Open Research does this. You can go on their website and see on the right-hand side a column that shows the different versions that have been submitted, the comments, and then I believe some additional information about the paper, the metadata, when it was published and when it was reviewed and whatnot. And Lisa has put in a few links here. So open review does include some other aspects. It includes open peer review manuscripts. This is what Lisa referred to as preprint servers. There's also final version commenting. I think we see that a lot in social media. Those are two really interesting aspects, but I do want to focus a little more on open identities and open reports. So we do see, to go back to that other slide, transparency under attack from two different views, right? Some people are thinking we have too much openness, right? And we've seen that with the social dilemma, right? People are just, bombarding each other with all sorts of stuff, be it relevant or not, that people become vicious when they attack the person themselves, or they really race to the bottom. There's also this other piece that people continue to harp on, is the publishers are keeping their processes for choosing reviewers. And this is even another aspect that I don't think I've touched on, keeping the process for choosing reviewers hidden, but then also, keeping those reviews hidden, that the other members of the community or the other folks who are in this field don't have a good understanding of why the paper was amended or what changes were made to the original work. BMJ, Dr. Schroeder said, science is based on experimental testing and data, yet ironically, just as I talked about with peer review, publishing is not also based on evidence. And that's something that BMJ really impressed upon me, was trying to change, but she did talk a lot about the lack of evidence, but also the lack of real interest from other publishers and even editors within BMJ for doing this. There's a lot of people who are really wed to the status quo and really are not that interested in examining their own kind of work. Dr. Schroeder did point me to some research that she's done at BMJ, but of course they're limited by small samples, small numbers of editors willing to or able to really spend time on this, but also the methods of review and processes differ across journals. So it's been hard for her to really aggregate them, especially as it pertains to other journals who are doing similar work. And these other journals don't often have an interest in sharing that data or opening them up to criticism. Lisa, you want to jump in?
Yeah, thanks, Jarret. Before you go on, can you go back 2 slides? I just want to touch on one more, sorry. Yeah, the first point here about too much openness could be detrimental. It feels like this would be quite different than, just a comment section on a news feed or something. So I guess it wouldn't be intuitive to me that transparency would encourage, inflammatory language and debate, that actually is a form of accountability. So maybe I'm not understanding that.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think maybe I was too loose in this description here. I think that mostly had to do with open post reviews. But you know, I think this also does touch on that scientists are people, right? We have our biases, and to Alice's point, we have these ego-driven responses, and you know, we don't always, despite you know our journal's best efforts, we don't always focus on the content. We may say, you know, start attacking the person or attacking the institution that they work for, you know, or having opinions, and you know, I think that is the intent here.
Got it. I think it looks like Alice has a related.
Oh, go ahead, Alice.
Yeah, I was just going to say, in fact, my point of view is that because the reviewers are hidden, they're pretty open and adamant with their opinions, which I think is going to be hard for the editors. How are the editors going to know? And sometimes, for instance, if we're talking about an SBC thing, there are some reviewers who think only interventions at the community should be funded, and that's such a you know, closed perspective. And I think maybe if the reviewers were not anonymous, because I've been in multiple papers where we're guessing, oh, that must be so-and-so, because you know their opinions so well. And they're also listing their own resources, their own papers. So perhaps it might be a tad more neutral and professional if reviewers were somehow shared and not hidden.
Yeah, that is that's sort of why I was circling back to that. That would be my guess too, but who knows?
But anyway. I think it would slow down the process. Given that they're volunteers, would it make them more likely to share or not? And it might make them take longer time in doing the review if they knew those comments are going to be made open.
Yeah, there's actually a study, I think, that looked at that and found that the reviewers did take a lot longer to submit their reviews when they had to polish it. And I will say that, you know, I can't speak for any other journal except GHSP, so I don't know if what we do is innovative or not, but you know, we look at all those things. I mean, if an article is going through peer review, if we send it to peer review, we already think that there is value to it. Like what we're generally looking for is for peer reviewers to help improve the paper. So to give feedback that's going to improve it. It's rarely to ask them to reject it. It's occasionally for that, but rarely. And so when we get feedback from those reviewers that we don't think aligns with the journal's goals or the paper's goals that we already think is valuable, we will generally give that feedback to the authors to say, you know, you can disregard this, or if you have the ability to redress this, that's great. Or, you know, so, I mean, I don't know if other journals do that, but we certainly do. And we don't kind of always, you know, maybe there's occasionally times when it happens, but most of the time the feedback that goes back is feedback that the editors generally agree with and think will improve the paper. And if there's anything that they don't agree with, they highlight that and give the authors the option. And I will also say that editors are usually very receptive to authors saying, we don't feel like making this change is going to improve the paper, or it's not within our scope, or it's not something that we agree with. And we accept those perspectives as well. So, you know, I don't know what other people's experiences are, but you know, you can always push back on a reviewer. So.
Yeah, and I think you know, the research that Natalie, you and I chatted about did come from BMJ, and it showed that only 8% of reviewers were agreeing to sign their reviews, and that really does, you know, suggest that people are they enjoy that anonymity. They benefit, and they may think that you know, their feedback is more productive when it comes from somebody anonymously. And
well, and yeah, and I think, I mean, obviously anonymity gives people sometimes permission to say and do things they shouldn't be saying and doing, obviously. But, you know, you think about, you know, you're your neighbor's dog is barking excessively and you don't want, that you want them to take their dog in. So do you go over and talk to the neighbor and say, hey, take your dog in because it's annoying me? When they probably already know that it's annoying them and it's going to cause some friction between you and your neighbor. I mean, these are the just, kind of similar situations where you don't always want to confront people or say things to people when they know it's going to be you. It's easier to kind of say, well, it's a neighborhood association, tell them that there are other neighbors who are saying that your dog's barking too much. It's I'm not saying it's the best analogy, but these are people you might be working with down the road too. You may recognize their work, or you may hear later that their paper was rejected by such a journal, and that you reviewed it. So they're your neighbors, honestly.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that 8% does touch on this idea that I guess I wonder from, there were so many questions that popped into my mind that I wasn't able to follow up on, but one is, would that mean that if there's only 8% of people who are signing the reviews and BMJ only accepts signed reviews, are those of enormously different quality that it makes up for the people who are choosing not to? I would guess it's not, but don't know.
Yeah, and I just want to also say, I mean, I don't want to sound so traditional that I'm against all these things. I'm certainly not. I think these peer review journals in general are evolving, and these things will happen probably over time. I would be probably supportive of having the report, like the peer review report and the author's response to that report published. That probably would be reasonable, because then you'd be able to see what the authors, how they took that feedback and what their response was, and whether they revised their submission in response to it or not. So that I think would be helpful versus just the report of the reviewer's feedback itself.
Correct. Right. Putting it all into one sort of
it comes that way. I mean, authors are expected to provide a point-by-point response to every note from every reviewer. So it's already there.
Right. So it shouldn't be right. Putting it online or making it open theoretically shouldn't be that hard. I did want to touch on this other point that Dr. Grundy made about multidisciplinary research, and this may not. And thanks, Alice, for joining. Appreciate your contributions. That especially as it pertains to this kind of work, that they want to be sort of on point when it comes to responding to certain reviewers. That if you have somebody who is responding from the computer science with a computer science background, you won't explain everything about computer science to them as though they were maybe coming from the dermatology field or something like that. And so it allows her and her colleagues to have more targeted revisions. I was kind of surprised to hear, though, from Dr. Schroeder that regardless of the refusal rates they had been noticing, they felt that it's an ethical argument to have, there's an ethical imperative for having these open peer reviews, that transparency outweighs the people who refuse. We have 14 minutes. I'm going to try and run through public and patient review. And this actually, I was hoping to Alice would stay on, because I know it sounded like she might have been bringing up a topic that is relevant to this, in that journals are, and I've noticed several of them now, including BMJ, including JMIR, are trying to bring in the lay perspectives. And my initial reaction was like, what? Like, how would that work? How would that even work, right? You have people and patients who are not really trained at all in science. They may not even have a background in health. But the criteria is different in these situations. They're not expected to comment on the very minute details or the data, or necessarily even the methods, although I think that is fair game. But it's more about, is it relevant to the community? Is it relevant to the patients who are living with these conditions or have undergone these interventions? And is it readable? And I was also surprised that Dr. Schroeder said that more and more folks who she interacts with as patients and lay providers or patient advocates are asking her for these journals, copies of these journals. And she was surprised that they would want this because it is couched in the language of scientists and researchers. But I think this has been the biggest lesson learned for me, is that these innovations, in particular the public and patient review, is about bringing science to the people, not bringing people to science. And this is where I really think, it would be very beneficial for us as public health practitioners to go. And I think it's no more obvious that this needs to happen than in the case with COVID-19, where you have all sorts of mis and disinformation. You have folks who are, doing things that I think would like, distancing, wearing face coverings, washing their hands, but they may not know why. And I think that's really good that they're doing these things, but with getting them to helping them understand the why is, I think, really important. At BMJ, the process does not actually necessarily speed up the reviews, although she did mention that patient reviewers were very, in her research, in her review of what they've done, the patient and lay reviewers were faster than the academic reviewers. So it does happen currently with academic review. And she said so far they've been really pleased with that. This is Dr. Grundy commenting on lay review. And of course, even Dr. Eisenbach said that this is not for every journal, right? It's in certain situations and certain journals where we think this would work. The emerging evidence from BMJ does suggest that patient review improves the biomedical literature. And Dr. Grundy said, we're accountable to the public. Our aim is public health. We've historically excluded patients and the public from scientific research. And that also really hit home to me. The lay review, I think, also has a really important role to play in our work with neglected and marginalized groups. And I see a really strong connection to our anti-racist and anti-colonialist work. Anyone want to jump in real quick? A comment, question? I have a few more slides on this, but it's really rich to me, so I wanted to offer a space.
I guess I just wonder how that relates kind of to our work, in the sense of, you think at least with SBC and CAM, the co-creation, that there are more in like pre-testing and formative research. But at the point of the journal, like, who would you select to be part of that review? You know what I mean? Like, that seems almost overwhelming to figure out who should be the spokesperson on behalf of like some of the areas that we study.
Yeah, and I feel like a good editor would hopefully be looking for people who do have that perspective. They may not be true lay people, but they would have a, country or program focus that is, keeping those people in mind as to how valuable this is. But at the broader picture, I mean, I still feel that journals, like, there's different types of media that fits different purposes, and I don't know that journals necessarily need to be targeted to lay people. I think the information can be useful to them, but I think it has to be developed in a different way. And I think like GHSP has started to do that with Knowledge Success, is taking articles that we have and trying to adapt them and present them in a more digestible way. And I think that's probably what needs to happen, because there's all kinds of different lines of communication here, whether you're communicating with other researchers who are doing similar work, whether you're communicating to other scientists, but obviously there are journals that fit this bill, but for a lot of them, it's really communicating with other people who are working in this field at a higher level. And so it's, how do you take this information and make it useful and accessible? And hopefully somebody is pointing out at some point that this may not be useful at any lower level. And that's where you hope that that's happening at a high level, so that you don't get to that point and think, oh, well, this is pretty much useless to anybody, so.
Yeah, you make a great point, Natalie. And I think that our field is very ahead of the curve in this respect, where we do include folks at the beginning, the co-creation process. We do the user testing. I don't think in a lot of fields, certainly in the medical field, but also even in some other public health fields, they do that they're really involving folks, the intended audiences or the stakeholder groups, as much as or giving thought to nearly as much as we do.
I was having a thought about that in the context of the vaccine trials that are happening with the COVID-19 vaccines. And there was a doctor friend of mine was commenting on his concerns about possible development of autoimmune disease 10 years out or something like that. And I was commenting that, surely those clinical trials are going to be continuing for 10 years and people are going to be tracked for that length of time. And he said, well, but I'm not sure that they're asking those questions. I'm not sure that they're looking for that kind of thing. And it occurred to me that is a little bit of a connection of the lay review or something like that, where the people who are in the clinical trial should have the opportunity to raise things beyond the standard set of questions that are going to be asked. That to me is sort of like a participant engagement process in even a medical clinical trial.
Yeah, and I do think that you make a great point, Elizabeth. And I think often of the are we treated as people? Are we comfortable? Is there a comfortable chair? Are you putting us in things as basic as that, right? Are you putting us on a cold metal gurney? Those kind of things, I think are very small, but also can make a difference, I think.
Well, yeah, and hopefully that's being addressed at the manuscript development stage, or obviously before that, way before that, even. So that's the kind of thing, is when you get into publishing and peer review, you're looking at something that is already moved down the river a long way. And so sure. Like, how do we influence things that go way back? And if it is bringing in lay people, it's maybe thinking this will encourage researchers to start taking their opinions more seriously, because it's going to come back to haunt them down the road when they submit their publication. But it has to be the right people. So, maybe patient advocates groups for cancer research or things like that,
Yeah.
Thank you, Natalie, for bringing us back to the topic at hand, but I am still going to digress again for a half a second, which is, oh shoot, now I lost the thread. Oh, there was a recent comment in the communication initiative, listserv thing about the imperative of having doctors in their initial medical training have an orientation or some version of training for SBC. And thinking about that from the perspective of scientists beyond just medical, clinical professionals, I wonder about, that upstream view of things, which is if there is that orientation to, and SBC isn't quite the right word, because it's really actually a little bit more just like the human part of it. So whether it's sociology and anthropology and the part that takes into consideration the people involved in the science and in the scientific inquiry. So that's I think it was Jarret's point about the cold gurney and whatever.
Yeah, and I think you both made great points about, you know, at this point, the patient and lay review may be way too late, you know. And I do believe there are initiatives underway to sort of get review or get input at the proposal stage, where people are proposing these research activities and asking for money from certain donors, and that's when obviously I think that a lot of the contributions can be really most valuable. The challenges of lay review, not surprisingly, as it is with regular peer review, is that it's difficult to find reviewers. It's voluntary. The incentive systems are not well established or well thought out or work well. But then there's also the issue with educating authors and editors about this process and why they would do it and what it would contribute. I'm going to stop here. I've got one more big one, gamification, and then I've got a bunch of small ones I can touch on, but we are running out of time, and want to take a pulse on whether folks are enjoying this, if they want to have more conversation. I mean, I've certainly been yapping away, but feel free to jump in and share your feedback.
Would it be useful to have a continuation? I mean, I find it very interesting.
Oh, it's 10:30 already.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do we want to minimize the slides and like take a hand raise, or, you know?
Well, I do think probably gamification kind of theories could be like, or approaches could be a whole section of itself, because that's something I think I'm interested in terms of like, how do you really make reviewers want to review, and are those types of things effective? I think when Jarret and I were talking about it, it didn't really feel like it was, but only because he was the reviewer in question and he's not somebody who reviews on a regular basis. But so yeah, I feel like there's room for another session.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Lisa and I have a conversation set up for more mapping out of the community practice for 2021. So we will certainly keep that in mind and circle back to you all, because I agree. I feel like that could be its own topic.
And beyond gamification, I did want to also open up the idea of chatting about open manuscripts, and this is also known as preprints. Then also there were wide range of other innovations that I've sort of discovered that I didn't really follow up on much at all, including blockchain, which is where we really try and develop an indelible record of where the research is coming from, where the comments are coming from, so that we can address rogue actors or instigators from foreign nations or within our own nation, I suppose. Persistent digital identifiers along these lines of knowing who's who in this space. Again, we have 9 million researchers out there, and they all have something to offer, but there's probably millions of people who are intent on disrupting this. Well, maybe not millions, lots. There's also resumes of reviews. There's ideas about changes in tenure committee review. There's peer review Congress, and there's peer review mentorship programs. The data checkers are also out there. So yeah, I would love to come back and talk more. And certainly, Natalie, perhaps we could find a way to get your experience in there more, also, and review the totality of these interventions.
Cool.
Okay, good.
Well, another option is, sorry.
Go ahead. No, go ahead, Natalie.
I was gonna say another option is to do something that's open to everybody. It could maybe just be like a regular brown bag, and we could kind of streamline maybe some of it, but and add these other topics to it, so that it doesn't necessarily get pushed off
within the community of practice,
right, or get pushed off months and months. So
yeah,
I just wanted to add one last thing, which is that journals are adapting, have been adapting to a lot of changes over the last, probably just even 20 years, with the advent of the internet. So many of them have switched from subscription-based to open access. A lot of them are doing these preprints. There's obviously online publishing instead of print publishing. There's, commenting features that now people have the option of. If they see an article, they can go in and they can comment and ask questions of the authors. I don't know how often they're used, but I see this field as continuing to have to adapt, just like everything else. So I won't be surprised if we, the publishing industry does start taking a lot of this to heart and making more changes. And certain journals are going to pick it up more easily than others. Because I was going to make this analogy to religion, like some journals are like the Catholic Church of journals, and others are, the more more modern, proactive kind of places. And sometimes it's very hard to change those things that are extremely entrenched. And they are adapting their content. I mean, many of them are doing podcasts, they do little surveys, they do continuing education, they have interviews with authors. So like, I do think that journal publishing has changed quite a bit. So maybe not a lot of the underlying structures, but certainly the outward structures.
Cool. Well, thank you, Jarret and Natalie, and we'll definitely loop back to you and take that feedback into consideration too, in terms of like the timing and how maybe the next part 2 is marketed. So
thanks so much for having me.
We'll talk soon.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Oh, and one more thing, if any of you have any questions about how peer reviewing is done, like really the nuts and bolts of it, let me know. I mean, I can only give you my perspective, but it's probably not too much different than a lot of other journals. Well, hopefully it's much better, but
I've recently, a friend of mine was published for the first time in JHSP, and she said it was an awesome experience.
Oh God, that's great to hear. That's great to hear.
Cool. Well,
all right.
Thanks.
Well, everyone. Thanks so much.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.